He cheated with her. She cheated with his husband. Unexpected twist. One morning. One morning, Julia, as always, was getting ready for work. She had no idea that a simple act of tidying up would change her life forever. Under the couch, tucked into a corner of a newspaper, was an envelope. Inside was a plane ticket to Los Angeles, purchased in her husband's name. But what surprised her the most was that the dates didn't match any of their vacations or business trips he had mentioned. Meanwhile, a few miles away, another woman, Olivia, was going through her husband's clothes before sending them to the laundry. In one of the jacket pockets, she found a note with a woman's name and a meeting time. Her heart sank. Could it be just a colleague? Or was there something more? These two women didn't know each other. They couldn't even imagine that their worlds would collide in ways they never expected. But one small clue, found by each of them, would become the key to a story that turned their lives upside down. Double betrayal. Imagine discovering something that completely shatters your perception of your partner. You live your life trusting them, and suddenly everything falls apart. That's exactly what happened to Julia. She stumbled upon a plane ticket to Los Angeles with a date that didn't match what her husband had told her. Her heart stopped. What could this mean? At the same time, another woman, Olivia, found a note in her husband's pocket. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. See you on Friday." Her mind refused to believe it was possible. But deep down, she knew this was the start of something terrible. Irony brought them together. Julia entered a cafe to gather her thoughts, where Olivia was sitting at a nearby table. A random request for a pen turned into a conversation, and within minutes, they shared their stories. Their suspicions started to align. The plane ticket, the note, Los Angeles. "Wait, does your husband work in finance?" Julia asked. "Yes, in a hedge fund," Olivia replied. Their world crumbled. Julia showed her the ticket, and Olivia shared the note. They realized their husbands weren't just cheating on them. They were doing it simultaneously. "We need to find out the truth," Julia said. "Yes, but how?" Olivia asked. They decided to work together. They started by following their husbands, who often stayed late at work, raising suspicions. Julia and Olivia waited outside the office. At one point, they saw Anthony and Jake get into a car, laughing and holding flowers. The women decided to follow them. They stopped at a restaurant. The men went inside, where a young woman greeted them with a hug before sitting at the table with both of them. "This can't be happening," Olivia whispered. "They're both with her?" Julia barely held back tears. The next day, the women decided to meet again. They needed to plan their next steps. Julia suggested talking to the woman. Olivia feared it would end in a scene. "If we don't tell her, she'll never know what they're doing." "She's a victim too," Julia insisted. "So are we," Olivia replied, wiping her tears. When they finally confronted the woman, the truth turned out to be even worse. Her name was Laura, and she thought she was only dating Anthony. She knew nothing about Jake. "They told me they were working on a joint project," she explained, "and that their friendship helps them collaborate better." Laura was stunned to learn they were married and cheating on their wives. She agreed to help Julia and Olivia. The women devised a plan. They wanted to catch them red-handed. On the following Friday, when the men planned another meeting, they decided to confront them. The confrontation. Friday arrived, and the women were ready. Julia, Olivia, and Laura waited outside the restaurant where the men had agreed to meet. Laura called Anthony to confirm he was there. "Yes, we're already inside. Come over, darling," came his voice. Laura stifled her anger and said, "On my way." They entered the restaurant, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen. A few minutes later, they spotted the table where Anthony, Jake, and another woman were sitting. She looked younger than Laura and was laughing sincerely at their jokes. "Who is she?" Olivia whispered. "It looks like they have another victim," Julia replied. Laura couldn't hold back any longer. She boldly approached the table. "Anthony, who is this?" Her voice was calm, but it carried a sharp edge of threat. The men froze in shock. Jake squirmed uncomfortably, while Anthony tried to stay composed. "Laura, what are you doing here?" he asked. "That's my question to you. And who is this?" Laura glanced at the young woman. "She's just a work partner," Anthony stammered. "A partner?" Olivia interrupted, stepping out of the shadows. "Are we also your partners? Or just wives you forgot to mention?" Jake turned pale. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? Are you serious, Jake? Maybe you should tell everyone how you and Anthony pretend to be devoted husbands at home while actually arranging double dates." The young woman at the table looked confused. "I didn't know about this. You're married?" she asked the men in horror. Laura nodded. "Not just married. They lead double lives. Or maybe even triple." Suddenly, the restaurant went silent. The other patrons began paying attention to the scandal. The men looked humiliated. Anthony tried to say something, but Laura cut him off. "Enough. We know everything. This is the end." Olivia took out her phone and played a recording they had made earlier when Laura spoke to Anthony about their plans. "This is no longer just between us," she said. "Everyone will know who you really are." Julia added, "You thought you could use us, but now you're the ones trapped." The men realized they had been exposed and tried to leave the restaurant, but the crowd was already recording everything. Their excuses sounded pathetic. Laura, Olivia, and Julia walked out together. They realized they were united not only by shared betrayal, but also by the strength they found in each other. "This is just the beginning," Laura said, looking at her phone. "We'll make sure they pay for everything." Laura sat in the dimly lit kitchen, sipping cold tea. Documents she had taken from Anthony's laptop were spread across the table. Among them were financial reports, correspondence with suspicious contacts, and strange transactions she couldn't decipher. The silence of the night felt deafening. Suddenly, her phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number. Laura hesitated, but eventually answered. "Mrs. Laura, you've gone too far," a man's voice said, low and cold. "Who is this?" Laura tried to sound confident, though she felt her heart racing. "Drop it. Destroy everything you've found and forget about it. Otherwise, this will be your last project." Laura froze. The voice sounded threatening but too calm, as if it were a statement of fact rather than a threat. She began to ask questions, but the call ended abruptly. Just the sound of the dial tone. For several moments, she stared at the phone, trying to comprehend if this was real. Finally, she turned on a flashlight and double-checked every door and window, ensuring they were locked. An unsettling morning. The next morning, feeling somewhat calmer, Laura decided to leave her apartment to meet Julia and Olivia. She packed her things and approached the front door. But as she turned the key, the door swung open easily, as if it hadn't been locked. How is that possible? She thought. She distinctly remembered locking the door last night, especially after the strange phone call. Laura cautiously stepped into the hallway and surveyed the apartment. Nothing seemed damaged or stolen, yet something felt off. On the coffee table in the living room lay her favorite notebook, though she remembered leaving it in the study. It was open, and the first page was blank. All the notes were gone. A chill ran down Laura's spine. She realized this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been here, and someone wanted her to know it. This is a warning, she told herself. Laura called Julia, who insisted they meet immediately. A frantic meeting. Julia and Olivia waited for Laura at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She arrived quickly but looked shaken. "Someone was in my apartment," she said without even sitting down. Olivia grabbed her hand to calm her. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" Laura explained the unlocked door, the missing notes, and the notebook left in plain sight. "This isn't just threats. They're trying to intimidate us," she said. "I got a call last night. Someone knows I'm digging." Julia leaned forward, her face serious. "That means we've hit on something big. But that's no reason to stop." Olivia looked less convinced. "What if this is dangerous? They might have resources we can't predict." Julia gave her a stern look. "If we back down now, it'll only prove they can control us." Laura took a deep breath. She knew there was no other way but forward. Calling for help. The women agreed they needed help. Laura called Nate and asked him to meet immediately. He arrived within an hour, dressed in a leather jacket, his face sharp and slightly menacing. "This is serious. If they've already been in your apartment, they know who you are and what you're doing," Nate said. "They're toying with you, but this is just the beginning. They're testing your weakness." "What do we do?" Laura asked. "We need to strike first," Nate replied. He explained that they had to gather more evidence while simultaneously showing they weren't afraid. Nate began to act, but his methods were far from conventional. The investigation deepens. Nate carefully listened to their story and reviewed the materials they had found. His reaction was mixed. "You're dealing with more than just infidelity here. This smells like big money and people who don't like to lose." Within days of investigation, Nate found a crack in Anthony and Jake's defenses. One of their contacts, a mid-level accountant, had previously dealt with Nate. The accountant agreed to meet, but only under strict conditions. During the meeting, Nate realized he was being followed. He deliberately changed his route to confirm his suspicions. It turned out he wasn't being tailed by one person but two. "This isn't just about you anymore. They want to eliminate anyone who poses a threat to their scheme," Nate warned the women. Revelations from the past. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that each of their pasts played a role in the current events. Nate uncovered documents linking Olivia's former boss, Mr. Gray, to the money laundering scheme. The revelation stunned her. "Gray ruined my career, and now he's back to ruin my life?" She admitted that Gray had once tried to involve her in illegal dealings, but she refused and became a target for dismissal. Laura's motive turned out to be more complicated. She confessed she had known about Anthony's shady dealings earlier, but kept silent because she had unknowingly benefited from some of the money for her business. I was complicit in this, even if unintentionally. But now I want to make it right. Nate revealed that Gray was also tied to a case that forced him to leave his position in law enforcement. For him, it was personal. This time, I won't let him get away with it. Uncovering unexpected ties. During the investigation, surprising facts emerged that further complicated the situation. Nate discovered that someone within the group helping the women was leaking information to their enemies. Suspicion even fell on one of the women. Emily, the young woman they met at the restaurant, unexpectedly started acting on her own. It turned out she was Mr. Gray's daughter and had been spying on Anthony and Jake. Her motives became clear when she said, "I've been trying to figure out how they're stealing from my father, but now I see they're all the same." Laura found a document referencing Project Phoenix. It was a code name for an operation involving money laundering through offshore accounts. Conclusion: they realized the issue was far bigger than personal betrayals. It was part of a global financial scheme, and now they were caught in the middle of a dangerous game. The failed ambush. Nate organized surveillance on one of Gray's key associates, who was scheduled to meet Anthony and Jake. The women believed this was their chance to gather critical evidence. The ambush, however, went awry when Gray unexpectedly arrived at the meeting place with his bodyguards. Nate and the women found themselves trapped, barely managing to escape. During the chaotic escape, they accidentally took the phone of one of Gray's associates. Nate hacked into it and discovered messages confirming that Gray was personally orchestrating the entire scheme. Outcome: despite the failed ambush, they gained a new lead. Laura's secret comes to light. Nate uncovered old financial records proving that Laura had used some of Anthony's money to expand her business. This revelation shocked Julia and Olivia. "You knew this all along?" Julia exclaimed. "I had no choice. My business was on the brink of bankruptcy, and I didn't know that money was part of a crime," Laura defended herself. Julia and Olivia distanced themselves from Laura, doubting whether they could trust her. "If you've already made a deal with him once, how do we know you're not doing it again?" Determined to prove her integrity, Laura decided to act alone. She began following one of Gray's top subordinates, putting herself in grave danger. Outcome: Laura uncovered key evidence linking Gray to the scheme, but her risk-taking could cost her life. Negotiating with Gray. The dark evening, with the eerie rustling of the wind and the roar of waves, set a tense atmosphere. Nate, Julia, Olivia, and Laura drove along a narrow road to Gray's estate. The villa sat on a remote coastline, hidden by towering trees and a massive fence topped with barbed wire. The women were nervous. Meeting the man who ran a criminal empire wasn't just risky, it was a leap into the abyss. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" Olivia asked, gripping her hands until they hurt. "We've come too far to turn back now," Nate replied. His voice was calm, but his gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. The massive gates opened automatically as their car approached. The villa was opulent. Marble stairs, a lit-up facade, and luxury cars parked in the courtyard. A black-suited guard greeted them. "Mr. Gray is waiting for you in the library," he said emotionlessly, gesturing them inside. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, antique paintings, and walls lined with shelves of books. Gray sat behind a massive oak desk, smoking a cigar and gazing at the fireplace. His dark suit was impeccable, just like everything around him. "You're brave to come here," he began without looking up. "But I don't believe you have anything that interests me." Julia stepped forward, holding a folder of evidence. "We know you're running this scheme, but your men, Anthony and Jake, betrayed you. We have proof of their fraud and can deliver it to people who will bring your empire crashing down." Gray finally looked up. His eyes gleamed like a predator assessing its prey. "And what do you want in return? Money? Protection? Or is this just another emotional outburst from scorned wives?" Olivia couldn't hold back. "You're wrong if you think this is about personal revenge. It's no longer about us. It's about the truth. And if you don't help us, all of this will surface, with your name included." Gray stood up, beginning to pace the room as if weighing their words. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourselves into. This scheme is just the tip of the iceberg. You're playing with fire, and that fire will burn you. But if it's war you want, I'm ready." Nate interjected. "This isn't war, Gray. It's an opportunity. A chance to get rid of those who are betraying you and maintain control of your empire." Gray stopped pacing. Turning to face them, his expression remained unreadable. "Let's say I agree. What are you offering me?" Julia showed him copies of the evidence, photos, messages, and recordings of Anthony and Jake's conversations. Gray reviewed the documents carefully. "This is interesting, but you realize that even with this, you have no guarantees? The police could just as easily use you against me, not them." Laura, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "We're not interested in destroying you. We only want them. Help us, and we'll make sure your name never comes up." Gray was silent for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. I'll give you what you need. But remember, I always get what's mine. If you try to deceive me, the consequences will be catastrophic." As they left the villa, Nate glanced at the women. "That was dangerous, but we got his attention. Now we need to use it to our advantage." Olivia smiled nervously. "I wonder if we just made a deal with the devil." Laura remained silent, but her determined eyes revealed she was ready to go all the way, even if it meant more risk. Julia looked back at the villa, where the lights were dimming. "Let's hope he doesn't decide to take us down with him into this hell." An unexpected agreement. The darkness of the evening enveloped Gray's villa. In the library, illuminated only by the warm glow of the fireplace, Julia, Olivia, and Laura stood before the large desk. Gray held the folder with the records Julia had brought as evidence. His face remained impassive, though the twitch of a muscle in his cheek betrayed a hint of tension. "Well, I see you've done your homework," he finally said, setting the folder on the desk. His voice was cold but steady, like the edge of a blade. "Still, I'm not sure I understand why you need my permission or assistance. What do you want from me?" Nate stepped forward, standing tall and alert. "You know these two men, Anthony and Jake, have crossed the line. They've betrayed not just their wives, but you as well. They're skimming money from your deals and hiding it through shell accounts. These documents prove they're already planning their escape with all the funds." Gray smiled, a predatory, humorless smile. "And you want me to solve your problem, right? Tell me, what's in it for me?" Julia interrupted. "We're offering you a chance to regain control. We'll help expose their schemes and ruin their reputations. But your name will remain clean." Gray approached them, towering and commanding, his presence filling the room. "Clean?" he repeated, staring directly at Julia. "Do you really think I care about my reputation? I built this empire because I don't play by the rules. But I don't like it when someone tries to steal from me." He turned to Laura. "And you? Why are you here? Do you want revenge too? Or are you trying to save your business that depended on these two frauds?" Laura, though caught off guard, gathered her courage. "Yes, I'm here for revenge. But I also want justice. They didn't just ruin my business. They destroyed my faith in people. This has to end." Gray walked to the window, gazing out at the dark ocean. He was silent for a long time, weighing his options. Finally, he returned to his desk and picked up the folder. "Fine," he said. "I'll help you. But there are conditions." The women exchanged uneasy glances. "You'll get everything you need: documents, information, even access to people who can help you prove their guilt. But my name never comes up in this story. Ever. I don't like the spotlight." Olivia frowned. "Why should we trust you?" Gray gave a cold smile. "You don't have to trust me. But think about it. If I choose not to help, you stand no chance of facing them on your own. You've already gone further than you should have." The women realized they had no choice. They agreed. "Fine," Julia said, tossing her hair back. "We accept your terms. But remember, if you betray us, we'll find a way to bring you down." Gray's laughter. Gray laughed. "I like you, Julia. You're brave. But remember, I always play to win." Nate patted Julia on the shoulder. "We've taken the first step, but now we need to act fast. Time is working against us." As they left the villa, Laura stopped and glanced back. The light in the library had already gone out, and Gray seemed to dissolve into his own shadow. "Was this a mistake?" she asked. Julia replied firmly, "We have no other choice. If he decides to betray us, we'll be ready. But right now, this is our only chance." Olivia said nothing, staring at the stars shining against the dark sky. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a deal with the devil, and the consequences of this meeting might be far more severe than they anticipated. A shocking discovery. The night had fully embraced the city as Julia returned home with the folder Gray had handed them. Her hands trembled, but she tried to keep herself composed. Laura and Olivia stayed with Nate to discuss the next steps, leaving Julia with the task of reviewing the evidence. Sitting at the kitchen table under the weak light of a desk lamp, Julia opened the folder. Inside were reports, emails, and photographs exposing the full scale of Anthony and Jake's schemes. She flipped through the documents, jotting down key points. Suddenly, her hand froze. Hidden between the documents was a photograph that made her heart skip a beat. It was her late father. He stood among a group of men, including Anthony and Gray. Their faces were serious, and in the background was a building Julia recognized. Her family company's former headquarters, which her father managed before his death. Her breath caught, and her heart pounded. "This must be a mistake. This can't be," she whispered, staring intently at the photo. Julia set the folder aside and tried to recall what she knew about her father's business. He had always seemed like an honest man, proud of his work, and spoke of moral principles that guided his career. But now, this photo cast doubt on everything she remembered about him. If he was part of this system, what does that mean for me? She got up and pulled out a box of old family photographs from her closet. Flipping through the pictures, she found another photo taken on the same day as the one Gray had given her. In it, her father stood next to two other men she recognized from the documents, key partners of Gray. Julia paced the room nervously, clenching her fists. If my father was part of this scheme, what does it mean? Did he know what he was involved in? And if he did, why did he hide it from me and Mom? Her thoughts were chaotic, her fears growing stronger by the second. It felt like the foundation on which she had built her life was crumbling beneath her. She picked up the photograph again, staring at her father's face. His smile was familiar, genuine, but now it seemed to hold a hidden secret. Unable to bear the tension, Julia called Nate. "I need to talk to you. It's important." 30 minutes later, Nate was in her apartment. She showed him the photo and explained her suspicions. How is this possible? He was an honest man. I know he couldn't have been part of this, could he? Nate studied the photo and shook his head thoughtfully. It's hard to say. Maybe he didn't even know what was happening. Gray is a master manipulator. He could have used your father to create the illusion of legitimacy for his deals. But what if he knew? Julia asked, her voice trembling. If he was part of this, then everything I'm fighting for is meaningless. Nate placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Your fight is far from meaningless. You're not responsible for your father's actions. But now we have even more reason to see this through. If he was part of this, you deserve to know the truth. Confronting her mother. The next day, Julia decided to speak with her mother, who had always avoided discussing her father's business. They met at a cafe. "Mom, did you know Dad worked with Gray?" she asked directly. Her mother looked shocked but quickly regained her composure. "Why are you asking about this? What happened?" Julia showed her the photograph. Her mother stared at it and went pale. "I knew your father worked with some questionable people, but he always said it was necessary for the business. He promised to protect us, and I believed him. But I never knew how serious it was." These words only deepened Julia's anxiety. "Do you think he was part of a criminal system?" "I don't know," her mother admitted. "But if he was, he did everything he could to make sure you'd never find out." Returning home, Julia combed through the documents Gray had given them. Her eyes stopped on a final piece. An email suggesting her father had tried to sever ties with Gray before his death. Maybe it wasn't just a death. Maybe it was something more, she thought. Julia resolved that her goal now was not only to expose Anthony and Jake, but also to uncover the whole truth about her father, no matter how painful it might be. Preparing for the final strike. The night was grim, and the desk lamp in Nate's office cast a sense of secrecy. On the table lay a map marked with locations, photographs, documents, and recordings they had gathered over the weeks. Julia, Olivia, and Laura sat nearby, their faces showing a mix of exhaustion and determination. "This is our chance to destroy everything they've built," Nate said, pointing to the chart on the board. "But if we make even one mistake, they'll disappear, and we'll be left waiting for their revenge." "So, what's the plan?" Julia asked. Nate began to explain. "We will force them to reveal their true faces. We'll create a situation where they'll be forced to show their true faces. It all starts with an invitation to a meeting where we'll gather the key players in this scheme: Gray, Anthony, Jake, and a few of their associates. The location must be perfectly planned. Guards, hidden cameras, everything set to expose them. Why would they agree to come? Laura asked. We'll create the illusion of a lucrative deal. They'll believe it's another big scheme where they can take everything for themselves. For this, we need you as the betrayed wives. You'll create chaos and distract them while we gather all the evidence. Nate assigns roles. To Julia, you'll be the bait. Your role is to establish direct contact with Anthony. You'll tell him you want to make a deal to finalize your divorce and leave everything behind, but you'll need his help with one last operation. Julia nodded, holding back her emotions. I can do it. To Olivia, you'll handle the technical side, hidden cameras, recording conversations, and ensuring everything is documented. You're our eyes and ears. Olivia smirked. Leave it to me. To Laura, you'll be our unexpected factor. Your appearance must catch them off guard. You'll step in when the situation becomes tense and break their concentration. To himself, I'll stay behind the scenes. My job is to control the situation and ensure they don't escape once they realize they're caught. Preparation for the meeting. The following days were tense. The women practiced their roles, preparing for every possible complication. Julia called Anthony several times, discussing the details of the deal. He sounded intrigued, but remained cautious. Olivia worked tirelessly with the equipment. Microphones were hidden in handbags, and cameras disguised as jewelry. Laura rehearsed her lines, preparing for the moment when she would face all the criminals at once. Meanwhile, Nate handled negotiations with Gray, who reluctantly agreed to help but set his conditions. Remember, if anything goes wrong, it will be your fault, Gray warned. The day of the meeting. The chosen location was an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. A large room, dimly lit, created an atmosphere of secrecy. Anthony and Jake were the first to arrive, accompanied by two bodyguards. They looked tense, but tried to mask it with confident expressions. Julia arrived a few minutes later. She looked flawless, though her gaze was icy. She approached the table where a folder of fake documents, prepared by Nate, lay. Are you sure you want this? Anthony asked, looking at her. I'm tired of fighting. If this helps both of us end things without a scandal, I'm ready, Julia replied, trying to sound convincing. From an adjacent room, Olivia monitored everything through the screens. Everything's going according to plan. The cameras are rolling, she whispered to Nate. Laura's dramatic entrance. In the midst of negotiations, Laura entered the room. Her sudden appearance caused surprise and tension. What is this show? Jake asked nervously, glancing at Anthony. Show? This is the truth you've been hiding for so long, Laura said, throwing a USB drive onto the table. It contained recordings of their conversations that Olivia had managed to obtain earlier. Anthony and Jake turned pale. This is a trap, Jake whispered, starting to stand. Sit down, Nate said as he entered the room, his gaze cold. The game is over. You're surrounded. As the criminals searched for an escape, the doors opened and police agents, whom Nate had called in advance, entered. All the evidence was in place, and their conversation had been recorded. Anthony and Jake realized they had lost. They tried to offer excuses, but the police weren't listening. Aftermath. When it was over, Julia stood by the exit, staring at the night sky. "We did it," she said. "Yes," Olivia replied, standing next to her. "But now, we're starting a new chapter of our lives." It was a victory, but each of them knew the true recovery was yet to come. Laura's presentation. Laura sat in the large conference room they had rented for the fake presentation. On the projector screen, a diagram of the fabricated deal they had created with Nate was displayed to convince Anthony and Jake of its legitimacy. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Laura began as Anthony and Jake entered the room. She smiled, but inside, she was bursting with tension. "This could be the biggest deal of your lives." She showed graphs, data, and potential profits, manipulating their greed. Anthony seemed interested, but Jake skeptically eyed the screen. "Too good to be true," Jake muttered, but Anthony interrupted him. "Why not try? If it works, we can make a fortune." Laura successfully convinced them, but her presentation took longer than planned, increasing the risk of them realizing it was a trap. Olivia's technical challenges. Meanwhile, Olivia was in a nearby room, connecting microphones and checking recordings. She kept a close eye on the monitors. "Cameras are live, audio is clear," she reported to Nate through her headset. Suddenly, one of the microphones began to cut out. Olivia quickly realized someone was interfering with their system. She had to improvise, switching to backup equipment, regaining control just in time. "Who did this?" she asked while reconfiguring the signal. "It looks like external interference." Not only did Olivia restore control, but she also discovered an attempted hack, raising suspicions of a mole within their ranks. Julia and Gray's conversation. Julia met with Gray in his private office. She had to play the role of a betrayed woman, seeking his help to get revenge on her husband. "I know you can help me," she said, looking Gray directly in the eyes. "You're the only one with the resources to destroy him." Gray listened intently, but his face remained cold. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. Julia showed him part of the evidence they had gathered against Anthony. Her voice trembled, but she tried to appear convincing. "Because I want the same thing as you, to get rid of him. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen." Gray agreed to help but hinted that he didn't fully trust Julia. This planted new doubts in her mind about how deeply her family might have been involved in this system. An unexpected warning. Late at night, as Nate worked on the final details of the operation, he received an unexpected call from an old acquaintance, Harry, a former detective he had worked with years ago. "Nate, I need to talk to you." "I've heard you're working on the Gray case," Harry said, his voice tense. "What do you mean?" "Someone on his team is playing both sides. I've got information that they know about your plan, and someone, either one of your contacts with Gray or someone on your team, is leaking information to them." This news stunned Nate. "Are you sure?" 100%. "I don't know who exactly, but if you don't stop this now, the whole operation will fall apart." Nate immediately informed the women about Harry's warning. "One of us is a traitor?" Laura asked, looking bewildered. "That's impossible." Olivia frowned. "It could be someone on Gray's team, or even Gray himself." Julia stayed silent, her thoughts focused on whether her father might have been involved in this in the past, And if Gray was now using her to cover his own tracks, we can't let this destroy our plan, Nate said. But we need to proceed carefully. I'll add another layer of security to uncover the traitor, if there is one. Nate organized a review of all the evidence and set up new recording systems that would be impossible to hack. The warning forced the group to act more cautiously, but also sowed distrust, threatening to ignite internal conflict. A room full of tension. The room was dimly lit. The warm glow of a lamp, shadows from scattered documents on the table, and the heavy atmosphere made every word feel significant. Nate leaned on the table, looking at the women. Harry said the information might have come from one of us or through negligence. I don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but we need to know if there's a traitor among us, he said calmly but firmly. Julia immediately snapped. Are you serious? We're all risking our lives here, and now you're accusing us of betrayal? Her voice was emotional, but not angry. She looked at Olivia and Laura as if seeking support. Olivia sighed and replied, Julia, he just wants to figure out what happened. We have to consider all possibilities. Laura, who had been silent until now, suddenly said, maybe we should consider that Gray is playing his own game. He always seemed too calm. And you, Julia, spend a lot of time with him. Maybe he's influencing you? Julia stood up sharply, her chair scraping against the floor. Are you suggesting I'm working with Gray? That's absurd. Laura replied coldly. I'm just saying you're the only one spending time with him alone. If anyone could have leaked information, it might have been him. Or what? Julia interrupted. Or maybe you accidentally told him more than you should have, Laura continued. Olivia interjected, trying to calm the tension. Enough. Now's not the time to accuse each other.